Howdy, I'm David Butler.
I'm Emily Freeman.
Welcome to Don't Miss This. We're so glad that you came or are here watching or listening, and we're just trucking along through, y'all, the Doctrine and Covenants.
We really do wish they came. What if they were all just right
Down here. Should
Yeah.
we do a live?
One time.
Like a live show. You can play with the toys over here, or if you get bored during the lesson, there's so much that could be happening.
We just imagine you. And you know, we tell you that all the time when we see you in grocery stores. I love when people come up and this is what they love to say. You said we should come up. That's my favorite thing. I'm always like, yes, we actually really love to see you. Because then we know who we're talking to and teaching. And I just have in my mind this catalog of people that I've met in random places.
Same,
Do you?
Same, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes.
airports, airplanes even.
And you want to know everybody. That's the thing.
We do.
And really, that's kind of the feeling, at least I got as I was reading through these sections and looking at them again. It's just like, I mean, we really are just halfway through, right? Kind of in the thick of.
That's so crazy, isn't it?
It's just nuts, and things are moving along, and you start seeing all these names of people that just show up. And today we have a section for a guy, and it's his mission call, and you're kind of like, how come everyone else didn't get a section? You know, I wonder if other people were like, wait, how come I didn't get a section in there? I got a really, really similar mission call to that person, and I don't know the answer to that, but there is, you know, you start looking and thinking like, what's the story behind all of these people, and what are their emotions, and how are they feeling, and do they feel like they're contributing, and sometimes we feel a little bit like, you know, I just feel like I'm just not doing what I want to be doing. Like I want to be doing something bigger and better and more impactful maybe. Recently I was watching the K-Love Fan Awards. I don't know if you know what that is. It's a Christian radio station, and the fans vote on a whole bunch of things, and one of the things that won was for television and movie, and the show The Chosen, which you know we love.
Oh, we love The Chosen so much.
Yeah, so much. It's a telling of the stories of Jesus, and it's just it's historical fiction, I guess you could say, but based out of the teachings of the Bible, and just it's so awesome. It just gives life and personality to names on pages.
Yes, from the New Testament. Just all of a sudden you're like, oh, I've never thought about that before. Yeah,
which you kind of want with the Doctrine and Covenants, right? I want personality and life in these, you know, in some of these people. Yeah, I know I'm dying. But wouldn't it be cool, you know? So anyways, it won. And so the director, a friend of ours, Dallas Jenkins, gave the acceptance speech. And when he gave it, he said, when I was younger, I used to practice award acceptance speeches in the mirror, and everyone laughed. And
have you ever done that
did.
Before?
No, I don't know why I would have done it before, but I don't think I practiced anything in the mirror ever. Maybe my smile for family pictures or something. But he says I used to practice. I do, because I have one eye that closes too much, so I have to like remember how to smile without it squinting. But he said I used to practice those award speeches in the mirror. And I always imagined that it would be in Hollywood for some big movie production that I did, and not in Nashville for a radio award. But he said, I wish I could go back in time, and I would say to that little boy, stop wasting your time. None of this is going to matter to you. Someday, all you're going to care about is telling the story of Jesus. And one day, you're going to be so grateful that you won an award that was voted on by fans, because that means that the story you're telling is having impact on people.
Ooh, that's so good.
And that's a different way to see, you know. He could have gotten that award and then thrown it in a bottom drawer somewhere, because he was like, oh, this is just a Christian radio award voted by fans, not the industry, not the, the big ones that everybody is going to be watching. But he saw it through different eyes. He saw his purpose, and he found thankfulness, and he found fulfillment in being in this small role that he is playing, because I think he sees the impact that he's having. And so that's kind of what we're going to see in these sections today.
Yeah, and what does that impact look like, and from who, and what could we learn from that? We're going to just start quickly in 77 just for a second because
it's such a fun section.
It's such a fun section.
I went to the New Testament because I thought we were going to the book of Revelation, but
and there's just a couple things you want to think about from this section. This is when Joseph is going through and trying to work on the book of Revelation in the New Testament. He's reading through it, and then he gets some questions, so he just starts asking his questions as he goes through.
And the format is super rad. Like, you want to open it up and see. It's so different than the other sections because it legit is Q&A. Yeah. It's like question, and here's the Lord's answer.
Yes. And
what you wish you could have.
Well, that's what I was going to say. That's my favorite part of 77. That is the lesson that it teaches is you can. You actually can go to the Lord and say, this is my question right here. And I truly believe the Lord will answer you. Now, it might not come like this, where you're just sit down and you're like, please tell me about verse 7.
And we don't know that this did. You know, we don't, there's no timing
in
this one.
But that as you ask questions, at least my experience has been, and it would be interesting to hear yours, is I will say, I want to know about this word. Like, remember when I was studying the Old Testament and I was like, I want to know what it means to be wise-hearted. And I just wrote it down because I was like, I want to learn about that. And over the course of the next 3 days, I had so many neat lessons about that word that now every time I see that word in the Old Testament, I'm like, oh, I remember all of those answers. And some of them were random, but I remembered those answers. So I love that what we learn in 77, besides about the book of Revelation, is we can go to the Lord with questions. These were really like in-depth questions that he was like, what is the meaning of this? And that Lord is going to answer us through the Spirit and through other scriptures, most likely, and through talks that we hear or things that happen at church or conversations we have with friends or even songs that we hear the words of. The answers will come if our heart is open and if we're willing to let the Spirit tutor us. So that's might be my favorite lesson in 77. You guys know we love the book of Revelation. It's probably one of our favorite books of scripture. And we told you earlier that we actually did an entire class on the book of Revelation because it was too hard to just take little parts of the second coming. So if you wish you understood more of the book of Revelation or the second coming scripture, you can still access that class forever. For as long as you live, we found a site where we can just put it up. They're hosting it for us. We'll put the link in just so you know where it is. But it's fun to know that that's what Joseph was studying before he got into section 78. Because I just love that perspective of this is kind of where we are.
And kind of like what's on his mind. Like what's his worldview right now? What's his God view right now? Because these are the things that he's obviously been like
pondering and really thinking about and meditating on.
And I don't know if you were going to say this or not, but something that is, if you are totally unfamiliar with the book of Revelation, it focuses a lot on the future redemption, the throne room of God. The end story of good conquering over evil, of these sanctified people that are around the throne of God. So it really gives this majestic, big picture of where God is going and how he's going to get a troubled people to that place. And so that's kind of the big sweeping themes,
which you love because Joseph is in that same place where he's like, okay, here's all my people. How am I going to get them to this place that I'm reading about, and what's that going to look like? And I love that as in verse 70 or in section 78, there is one verse at the end, but I just want to start there, that he says to Joseph, verily, verily, I say unto you, you are little children, and ye have not as yet understood how great blessings the Father has in his own hands and prepared for you. And I just love that thought that he's like, Joseph, you are just a little child in understanding this great work that is happening. And if you've ever read the book of Revelation, you probably have felt like a child in understanding, where you're like, I have no idea what this is even talking about. And so
and then when
acknowledge that that's okay if you feel young.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and when you do kind of the parts you do understand, where you see like this glorified throne room with these these normal people who've been invited into the presence of God, with angels and other holy beings. You're kind of like, I don't like a little kid who doesn't belong there.
Yes.
Sort of, feeling. And you'll see in section 78, he will use really big Revelation-esque language of kings and queens, priests and priestesses being crowned, and kingdoms, and so you see that language, and it maybe is in reference both to what he was studying and here. And were you going to talk about what 78 is?
Or, yeah, let's just start. You start and talk about that, and then we'll dive
about the
into
stuff
that.
in it. So here's kind of it's interesting because you go from that majesty and bigness in 77, and then in 78 it's like, okay, we have to figure out how to print the Doctrine and Covenants. We got to get the paper. We got the stores. Someone's got to and it's all about forming what's called the United Firm or the United Order. Those are synonyms with each other. This organization of the printers and the stores, both in Missouri and in Kirtland, he forms them all together into this coalition, this co-op of businesses that are going to help finance the printing of the scriptures, the building of the temple, and the buying of land in Zion, and taking care of all the poor. So it's the new kind of fund money. How are we going to get the money? How are we going to fund all of these big projects that the Lord's commanded us to do? And so isn't it funny that it goes from revelation to temporal, okay, now we got to pay the bills.
and I love also that there is something about the book of Revelation that actually does make you want to set your life in order. It's almost as if he's coming out of that place and he's like, okay, I feel like there's things I need to do. And in fact, one of our favorite parts of section 78 is this word prepare, that it just says, it keeps saying it over and over again. You're going to prepare this and prepare this. And you're going to watch in this section, this feeling of, am I prepared for what is next? Which I think we all also go to that place when we read any second coming scripture, that generally I walk away from those second coming conversations, whether they're section 45 or section 29 that we read earlier, or if you're in the book of Revelation, thinking to myself, am I prepared for what is going to happen next? And I love that that's kind of where Joseph's mind goes, is, okay, am I prepared for what I need to be doing? And we do the same thing, temporally and spiritually, right? We start thinking about food storage. We start thinking about all of those things. But then we also think about the 10 virgins, right? We go to both of those places. And I love that that's where he goes. And in this chapter, he says prepare 8 different times. And then he tells them how to prepare and to prepare for. And we want to look at both of those things as we dive into this chapter.
And I think it's fun to point out, like you were saying, sometimes you talk about the temporal and the spiritual. I like that in this section too, he just says, okay, you think that all these mercantile businesses and the way I'm trying to teach you to sacrifice money and buy lands and stuff is earthly. You think that is temporal, but it's actually changing you spiritually is what is happening, in all of this. So almost reminding them, don't get caught up in, what can be the nitty gritty of all of that. And he's just like, I'm actually preparing a people. I'm actually changing all of you through.
Yeah, and you love
what seem
where
temporal.
He addresses that in verses 5 and 6 of section 78, when he says that ye may be equal in the bonds of heavenly things, yea, and earthly things also, for the obtaining of heavenly things. And then I love in 6 when he says, for you are not equal if you are not equal in earthly things, you cannot be equal in obtaining heavenly things. And just that lesson right there of learning how to take care of each other here and provide for each other here, and what provision looks like here, we're going to take that with us there when we go there, and how important that is as we talk about this preparation process. So as you go through and you look through some of these verses in 11 through 14 and 18 through 20.
And sorry, we went a little out of order of the paper.
Oh.
We started on the bottom and then we're going to end on the top. Just, it's summer. We're going to shake things up. So if you're...
Also because your favorite lesson you're going to want to keep it at the end. So we're going to keep your best part for last, everyone. So he tells them how. This is how you're going to prepare. Through covenant, he tells them, through commandment. I love when he talks about through thankfulness. He's going to teach them this principle, and we'll read that verse with you, that it is through thankfulness that this is going to happen. And we love this word provision and providence. He says, through my providence.
Verse 14.
Is how you will prepare. And I love that thought about his providence, because I think there are sometimes when you look at end time prophecy and those things that are ahead of us, and you think, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it. And I love him saying, listen, it's going to be through my providence that you will be prepared. And in that same verse, he says, I will be with you, or just right below that. Where is that verse that I love? Oh no, it's going to be in verse 18. So in 14, he talks about through my providence. In verse 18, he tells them, I will lead you along. And I love the thought of that this part of this preparing is our work, and part of it is his work. He's going to provide for us. He's going to lead us along. And I love the comfort in that. And then he talks about what he's preparing them for. And these might be some of my favorite Doctrine and Covenants verses. I don't know if you are a collector of favorite verses in books of scripture, but this set of scriptures, sometimes I just love to repeat over and over to myself in my head. He says this, I'm going to start in 17, and I'm just going to go through 19. He says this, verily, verily, I say unto you, you are little children, and you have not as yet understood how great blessings the Father hath in his own hands and prepared for you. And you cannot bear all things now. Nevertheless, be of good cheer, for I will lead you along. The kingdom is yours, and the blessings thereof are yours, and the riches of eternity are yours. And he who receiveth all things with thankfulness shall be made glorious, and the things of this earth shall be added unto him, even 100-fold, yea, more. How many times have there been in your life when you're like, this is not going to work out? We're not going to see the resolution of this, and no matter what we do, there's not an end in sight of how that resolution will come. And those are the times when I just whisper these 3 verses over and over and over again. I say them out loud as I go through my day. And I love that reminder that your part is just to receive all things with thankfulness. Don't you love that that's your part?
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm like, okay, I can do that. I can actually do that. And then
to recognize God's providence.
Yes, to recognize God's providence.
I'm a part of this. I'm with you. I'm in this with you.
And even if you don't see those things he promises you, right? The kingdom and the blessings and the riches, even if you don't see those, I love that he's like, they're yours. So just what you've got to do when you can't see that is start looking for, I'm leading you. Start looking for that. And for my providence where you are, be thankful for that. And if you can learn that, just day by day way of living, then the things of the earth will be added to you. And I love when the first time I read this verse and it really stuck out to me, I can remember when I got to the part, the things of this earth will be added to you 100-fold. Like in my mind, I was like, oh, that's all I need. And then when there were those next 2 words, yea, more, I was like, oh, I need to work on being grateful. You know, I need to work on what that looks like. And we love, well, let's go to this part. What are we preparing for? And then we will come back to that verse because it's such a good one. And I love that he says this, do the things which I have commanded you, saith your Redeemer, who prepareth all things before he takes you. For you are the church of the firstborn, he says. And I love that. I love that reminder that he's like, let me tell you what I'm preparing you for, because this is who you are, right? We see that word, the church of the firstborn, and that might feel like, I don't even know what that is or if I am one of those, but you could substitute for that, you are my elect, or even simply mine. For you are mine, he tells us. You just prepare, for you are mine. And then he says, and he will take you up in a cloud and appoint every man his portion. And I just love those 4 words. You are, and he will. What a beautiful promise that he's like, listen, you're already qualified for this because you are his. And he will, because he already promised you he would. And I love the promise of that. And as we look at this and come out of this, he says at the end, he that is a faithful and wise steward shall inherit all things. We talked about that in section 76, that fullness, all that the Father has, that's what's waiting for you. But just that thought of just all things. And as you go back and look at that relationship of covenant and commandment and allowing for his provision in your life, but then that one powerful lesson from 78 that we've got to learn how to receive all things with thankfulness. And we talked about, like, what does that look like? What would that look like? And we love that where we go next is 79, which is the section you were talking about, that you were like, why out of all the mission calls did they choose this one? And as we studied Jared Carter, there was one thing that we fell in love with about him. And it just seems that he was a man who lived with that vision of thankfulness, that daily thankfulness. And we just wanted to tell you a little bit about that. It's going to come from this book that you know we love so much. And do you want it?
Yeah.
That we love so much because it's going to describe for you his early years in the church and what his perspective was in those years, what his vision was, how he lived in the day to day.
So when you get, so we just divided up with his numbers, you know, because he seems to be a counter, you know, of things. And so.
And you love that count your many blessings because Jared Carter just wanted to.
Right. So.
You'll see right here in the journal, we're going to move to this part where he's just like 6 and 6 and 79 and 15 and 80. And you just love him gathering all of these.
So
blessings.
that first 6, he had just been on a 6-week-long mission. So we have 6 weeks. He's been gone for 6 weeks. Right when he comes back to Joseph and he says, okay, now what next? Like, I'm ready to do something else, which is, you just really, really love that about him. And so he goes on this next mission. He says, and I was there for 6 months and 2 days.
Who's counting?
Yeah, it's how long I was there. And he says, I was privileged to bring 79 souls to Jesus. And I bet he has every single one of their names, you know, written down. Yeah. It's just neat that he's just like, oh, I can count for you these 79 experiences. And when he first came across the Book of Mormon for the first time, actually it was a man who was trying to, you know, trash talk the Book of Mormon and said, look at this fake book. And he like read it and he was like, I actually think that's real, you know? And so he wanted to join in. And he said this when he came back after being baptized by Hiram Smith. He says, I came back and shared my enthusiasm for sacred truths. Some of my best friends, as I had supposed, now became my worst enemies. They mocked my faith and promised me land if I would renounce Mormonism. My reaction, not for 15 of the best farms in this place would I stay and abandon Mormonism. And so that's where we have that 15. That's so cute. He's like, I would have done it for 14, but you know, it's like not for, or 16, he's like, but not for 15 of the best farmers would I ever give something like this up. And then later he gets to go out on a mission with his brother. His brother, like independently of each other, both found the gospel of Jesus Christ and embraced it. And they went on these missions together. But he says, when I came back to Ohio after one of those, he said, I met with some of my brothers and I heard them read revelations that caused my heart to rejoice. And then he says this line, I've seen many marvelous manifestations of the power of God in more than 80 instances. And I want that list so bad.
Yes.
From his journal. Like, I love that he's just like, he doesn't say, I have seen God's hand so many times, but he's like, I think it's been about 80 times that I have seen marvelous manifestations of the power of God in my life. This guy's journal should be the Doctrine and Covenants. They should just replace it. It could be so fun. And then this line that we love that he says, he talks about some of the time that he says that his missionary work wasn't very fruitful. And he's like, man, sometimes it seems like the whole world is ignorant you know? And there's days like that, aren't there? Where you're like, oh, you have these 80s days?
Yeah, just because you're trying to count your many blessings doesn't mean they're going to be overflowing every single day. And you love that he shows the reality of that.
Yeah. And he says, man, it seems like the world's unapprised of the great work of God, and the God of heaven has commenced. It's like people seem to just be clueless about all the big things that God is doing among us, and how neat for him to see that in there, right? He sees the book of Revelation, in the printing press. You know what I mean? Yeah. He sees it in all of that. And he says this, there are hundreds of people actually ready to declare in the name of the Lord that they know the Book of Mormon is of divine origin. And I myself am one of the hundreds. And that line is just one of our favorites, because he says there are hundreds of people who are all involved in this, who God's working with unitedly, collectively, and individually. And he just says, you know what? I'm actually just one of those hundreds. Like I don't need the big awards. I don't need the big callings. I don't even need my section in the Doctrine and Covenants. Take it out. Put someone else in if you want in here. What is really focused on in his section, which is so short, is he is given this promise. And the promise is in verse 3 is, inasmuch as he is faithful in this calling to go from city to city and place to place, I will crown him again with sheaves. And we love replacing that word, sheaves. Those are wheat stalks.
Yeah, and bundles. Yeah. They would be bundled on your back, these sheaves. You see that word used so often in the Doctrine and Covenants. And particularly with your kids, they might wonder, like, what does that even mean? Those sheaves. And it would be these bundles of wheat, which would symbolically represent a harvest. That's the symbolism going on there.
That kind of gathering idea. Yeah. And we just want you to replace it every time you read it with bundles of people. Inasmuch as he is faithful, I will crown him. And what will be his award? It will be bundles of people. The experiences they had together, the relationships that were forged, the marvelous manifestations of God that he saw in each of their stories.
And that thought that it would be almost more than he could number, right? This thought of bundles. And you love that we learn from him this thought of numbering and bundling things as you go. And there's an interesting lesson we learned from the end of his life. When we were reading it, we were like, let's just not teach this part, because
we hate sad
you feel sad about it. But in verse 2 of 79, it says, I will send upon him the Comforter, which shall teach him the truth and the way whither he shall go. And I love that spirit, that having the Spirit with him was going to help him get that laser focus of living in thanksgiving, right? So that what would be added to him was 100-fold, yea, more. And you start counting up the 6, 6, and 79, and 15, and 80, and 100. That's what 100-fold looks like. And it's every day, and it's him keeping those lists and counting. And for a time, that's how he lived. We watch him go through this season of apostasy that's coming. We haven't talked a lot about that yet, but we are just entering into this season of where people are going to start wanting to have these conspiracy theories, and they're going to want to talk about these things that are happening, and they're going to start talking against each other, and he is going to get swept up in that. And it's interesting because you watch him waffle for many years. He thinks about leaving, and then he comes back strong for 3 years, and then there's something someone else says, and he kind of walks away again, and then he comes back strong again for several years, and finally at the end, right towards the end of his life, he leaves again. And it's interesting because there's this quote from him.
Yeah, a guy who knew him, George A. Smith, is actually Joseph's cousin. He said about him, I remember when in Kirtland I once heard Jared Carter say that he had sacrificed everything that would ever be required of him. And then he said, I've sacrificed all my property once, but I will never do it again. And then he said, now he is just numbered among that list of those who walked away.
And it's so interesting when you think about it. We were talking about this, that in the beginning, what was numbered was everything he was thankful for, right? He was like, and this many souls, and this many marvelous manifestations, and his eyes were so focused on what he was thankful for. And at the end, it's almost as if it shifted to what he was entitled to instead. Such a different way of thinking, and important, I think, for us to recognize, as much as you don't want to share the end of that story, but it's important to realize that your vision can shift, your perspective can actually shift, and you can have 80 marvelous manifestations, and at the end of your life feel like, I did that all once, and now I'm entitled to never doing that again. And what a different perspective that would be.
We have just this little side story on here that's really cool, because you may have heard this story before, and there's a really cool video made that you might want to show as, in connection with this lesson. Because one of those sheaves, if you were to pull out one of the little wheat stalks from Jared Carter's mission, is a man whose name is John Tanner. And this was a guy who was so wealthy. Jared Carter was actually given the spiritual gift to heal. And he talks about that. You can read it inside here. And he talks about some of his experiences with that. And one day he comes across John Tanner, who just had a leg infection, and he hadn't been able to walk. And they teach him, and Jared heals him. He's healed and baptized that very night, And this is what he says about what he owned. I owned a hotel, several homes, 2 large farm orchards, a dairy, a sawmill, an island, and 2,200 acres of timberland. So this was a really, really rich dude, and joined in and was just happy as a little clam to be a part of it. And then he has this dream one December that he needs to go to Kirtland right away. And he leaves right away to go to Kirtland. And when he gets there, he finds that there is such big financial trouble with the Kirtland Temple. Had he come one day later, the record says that they would have defaulted on their loan for the Kirtland Temple. And he comes in and he gives $2,000 to save that loan on the day that he gets there. And later will give $30,000 and another $2,000.
Imagine how much money that is in that time.
Yeah, I mean, it's so big. It's so much money that he is just giving away. And when he eventually moves to Missouri to build up Zion there, this is what he wrote in his journal. We borrowed a team and one old broken down stage horse and an old turnpike cart, a little keg of powder, and $7.50 in cash. And that is what they took with him, because he just gave that all away. And you'll see this in the story. It's awesome. At the end of his life, right before the martyrdom, he's headed off on another mission, and he's got that old receipt, the note of $2,000 that the church owes him for bailing them out with the Kirtland Temple. And Joseph asks, well, what do you want me to do with it? And John Tanner says, oh, it's yours. You can do with it whatever you want. I'm giving it to you. I'm giving it to God, to this cause, to his work. And that's when you'll see this little line, God bless you, Father Tanner. Your children shall never beg for bread. And gives him that blessing that is there. And anyways, don't you love these little stories that are just
one of the hundreds?
Yeah, just one of the hundreds, And is his story any different than Jared's? Jared could have at one day said, I wish I could have been the one to give all that, and someone could have made a movie about me, or whatever. But just each of these people, God is in their stories, and they can, if they live with that thankfulness and can see that, his providence is moving and working, and I'm a part of it. It just thrills. It hits different.
It's so good. In the last section, which is so short, section 80, what's going to happen is these 2 men are called to preach. And you love in verse 3, it says, wherefore go ye and preach my gospel, whether to the north or the south, to the east or to the west, it mattereth not, for you cannot go amiss. Therefore declare the things which you have heard, and verily believe and know to be true. Behold, this is the will of him who hath called you, your Redeemer, even Jesus Christ. Amen. And there's such a neat lesson in those 2 verses, because we learn this principle. Sometimes we emphasize where we serve, and we've got this written right here in verse 80. Sometimes we emphasize where, and the Lord so clearly right here just helps shift our perspective by saying, It doesn't matter where you serve, it matters how you serve. That's what matters. He's saying to them, you just declare the things which you have heard and which you believe and which you know. That's all I need you to do. All I care about is how you serve. Where you serve, you can't go amiss. I love when he says that.
Yeah.
Just, wherever you are, you can't go amiss. And
whatever it is you're trying to do, you know, in your circumstances, like you're not missing it. You're not missing the big opportunity. You're in it. You're a part of it. You cannot go amiss.
Yeah. You just go to the north or the west or the east or the south. It's not going to matter. And I love that thought about that as we think about our errand, right? We just talked about that recently. And as we think about our circle of influence and maybe dreams that we had of making this difference in the world, and then we start realizing, but we really are all one of hundreds. That's who we are. But we are making an impact to one somewhere. We are doing that. And how important that is. And when you think about Jesus, where were we just studying? Was that here or where? I never can remember because I am in the scriptures so much. But were you and I the ones talking about when Jesus was resurrected, that he never came back to thousands? He only came back to small groups of people. He came back to Thomas. He came back to the 2 people on the road to Emmaus. He came back to Mary Magdalene. He came back to these little groups of people. In that moment when he could have come down to thousands and been like, I'm back, you know, here I am, or to Pontius Pilate, you know, or wherever he could have gone, but that often the greatest work is done in those one of hundreds.
Behind closed doors,
yes,
with hiding disciples,
yes,
you know,
just those little moments. And there's something important to be remembered about that, and that it doesn't matter where as much as it matters how, and maybe sometimes who, you know.
Yeah.
I have this story that it might be one of my favorite mission stories ever. I have a good friend who lives in Salt Lake, and her son was called to serve a foreign mission. But while he was in the MTC, his visa never came. And so he became a visa waiter. We all know people who are like that. And he was going to get sent to serve. And so he went, and they thought he would just be 4 to 6 weeks. And so he went, and he told his family, I'm not going to go right now to the place where I'm supposed to go. But and he would write home about where he was tracting and the doors he was knocking on and the people he was serving. And it was about 6 weeks, and then his visa came. And he wrote home to his mom to go to the stop sign, this 4-way stop just right by their home. And she went there, and his transfer tag was there. And turned out he had been right in their mission, just several miles from their home, the entire 6 weeks. And they had no idea. He never wrote home and was like, and they're sending me to Salt Lake, and it's like I didn't even go, and I'm going to be 4 miles from our house, and I just have 6 weeks to wait for that visa to come. But you love that they had no idea. They were listening to these mission experiences and these emails he was writing home, and he was knocking on doors, and he was tracting, and he was having these marvelous manifestations and all of these things in his own backyard, like right where he grew up. And he never complained about it once, but what he saw is, this is 6 weeks of my mission, and I'm not going to pass up the goodness of it, and I'm going to be thankful for every minute of it. And can you imagine how crazy? My friend called me, and she's like, this is the craziest thing. I am holding my son's transfer tag. He has been right here in my place for the last 6 weeks, and I didn't even know he was here. And just how awesome that was. And I think it's a good reminder for us, especially when we feel like we are, you know, just one of hundreds, and maybe someone doesn't even know our name or our story or what we're working on, but how powerful our influence is. And it actually doesn't matter where or how big, it just matters how.
Yeah, and like you said, who, particularly if that who is him, right? Where it's like, oh, and it was his providence, counting the ways that I've seen him inside my story actually is where it becomes really thrilling. Not with the setting of it, you know, or whether it was how I expected it to be, but seeing him in it is what makes that story like, oh, that is, it just, I wouldn't trade the 15 best farms, you know, for it. So,
yeah, so good.
All right, see you next week, y'all.